In March 2024, an AI system analyzing ancient DNA from Scottish burial sites identified a genetic sequence that shouldn't exist. The pattern appeared in 4,000-year-old remains from the Orkney Islands, but it matches DNA from populations that lived 2,000 miles away and wouldn't reach Scotland for another 1,000 years. The AI flagged it as an error. Researchers ran the analysis again. Same result. Same impossible sequence. The DNA is real, the timeline is verified, and nobody can explain how it got there. This is what the AI discovered in ancient Scottish DNA, why it's rewriting everything we thought we knew about human migration, and why the implications are more disturbing than the mystery itself. The project began as routine genetic archaeology. Researchers from the University of Edinburgh collected bone samples from 127 ancient burial sites across Scotland, dating from 6000 BCE to 500 CE. Standard DNA extraction, standard sequencing, standard analysis. Except this time, they fed the data into a new AI system trained on genetic patterns from 50,000 ancient genomes worldwide. The AI was designed to identify population movements by detecting genetic markers. When people migrate, they bring their DNA with them. Genetic variants combine in predictable ways. You can trace human movement across continents by following genetic breadcrumbs through time. Vikings to Scotland, Anglo-Saxons to England, Celts across Europe. The genetic record matches the archaeological record perfectly. Except in this case, it didn't. The AI identified something in Orkney Island samples from 2000 BCE that looked like Pontic-Caspian steppe DNA. That's the genetic signature of people from the grasslands north of the Black Sea, modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia. Steppe ancestry is common in modern Europeans. Bronze Age people from the steppes migrated west around 3000 BCE, bringing horses, wheels, and Indo-European languages. This particular genetic variant, a specific combination of SNPs in the lactase gene region, doesn't appear in Western European DNA until around 1000 BCE. It's a late-arriving steppe marker associated with populations that migrated during the Iron Age, not the Bronze Age. Finding it in 2000 BCE Scotland is like finding a smartphone in a Viking grave. The technology didn't exist yet. The research team thought it was contamination. Modern DNA getting into ancient samples happens constantly. Lab techs breathe on samples. Skin cells fall into extraction tubes. That's why every ancient DNA study has contamination protocols. They verified the samples were clean. No modern DNA, no lab errors. Then they thought it was statistical noise. Maybe the AI misidentified a similar-looking sequence. They had human geneticists manually examine the data. Clear, unambiguous. A genetic variant that shouldn't exist in Scotland in 2000 BCE, sitting in the genome of a person buried on the Orkney Islands 4,000 years ago. So they tested 14 more samples from the same site. 4 of them had it. 4 out of 14 ancient Scots carried a genetic marker from the Pontic-Caspian steppe that wouldn't appear in Scotland for another 1,000 years based on every other piece of evidence from across Europe. But here's where it gets stranger. The AI didn't just find the marker. It found context. These 4 individuals also had elevated steppe ancestry compared to their neighbors. They weren't typical Neolithic Scots. They had significantly more genetic similarity to Eastern European populations than other people buried at the same site in the same time period. The AI identified them as genetic outliers, not errors, not contamination. Actual people with ancestry that didn't match anyone else in Britain at that time. People whose genetics suggested they or their recent ancestors came from somewhere they shouldn't have been able to come from. Researchers are left with 3 possible explanations. Each one breaks something we thought we understood. Theory 1. There was earlier contact with the steppes than we knew. This is the least terrifying option. Maybe Bronze Age trade routes extended further than archaeological evidence suggests. Maybe small groups from the Pontic-Caspian steppe made it to Scotland 1,000 years before the main migration. Maybe a handful of travelers, traders, or warriors reached the Orkney Islands and left genetic traces that disappeared from the main population. The problem with this theory: there's no archaeological evidence. We have extensive records of Bronze Age Scotland: burial cairns, pottery, tools, houses. None of it shows Eastern European influence. No steppe-style weapons, no horse remains from that period, no linguistic evidence, no cultural markers, just DNA that shouldn't be there. And the genetic data doesn't support isolated contact. If a few travelers arrived and reproduced, their descendants would show gradual dilution of steppe ancestry over generations. Instead, the AI identified discrete individuals with high steppe ancestry surrounded by people with zero steppe ancestry. That suggests recent arrival, not ancient mixing. The pattern looks like fresh immigration, not old heritage. These people weren't descendants of steppe travelers from 500 years earlier. They were either steppe travelers themselves or first-generation descendants. But there's no evidence for how they got there or where they came from. Theory 2. We're dating something wrong. Maybe the remains aren't from 2000 BCE. Radiocarbon dating isn't perfect. Lab errors happen. Maybe these samples are actually from 1000 BCE and somehow got mislabeled or contaminated with older material from the site. The problem with this theory: they've now radiocarbon dated the samples 4 separate times at 3 different labs. Every test confirms 2000 BCE plus or minus 50 years. The bones are Bronze Age, not Iron Age. They also dated surrounding remains from the same burial site. Everything aligns chronologically. The genetic outliers are buried alongside people who date to the same period and have typical Neolithic Scottish ancestry. If the dates were wrong, everything at the site would be wrong. But only these 4 individuals have impossible genetics. The others match expected patterns perfectly. Radiocarbon dating can be wrong, but having it be wrong by exactly the amount needed to explain this specific genetic anomaly, and only for these specific samples, while all surrounding samples date correctly, that's not measurement error. That's targeted temporal impossibility. Theory 3. The genetic variant evolved independently. This is the explanation nobody wants to consider because it breaks population genetics as we understand it. Genetic variants don't just appear randomly in the same form in different populations. When the same mutation occurs independently in separate populations, it's called convergent evolution, and it's extremely rare for specific genetic sequences. The odds of the exact same combination of SNPs emerging independently in Scotland and the Pontic-Caspian steppe are astronomically low. But there's precedent. The lactase persistence mutation, the ability to digest milk as adults, evolved independently multiple times in different populations. Europeans got it one way. East Africans got it a different way. Both mutations achieve the same result through different genetic mechanisms. The problem is, this isn't that. This is the exact same genetic sequence appearing in 2 populations separated by 2,000 miles and supposedly 1,000 years. It's not convergent evolution producing similar results through different mutations. It's identical mutations appearing in different places at different times. The odds against this are incalculable. Genetic variants spread through reproduction and migration. They don't spontaneously generate in identical form across separated populations. If this variant evolved independently, it violates fundamental principles of population genetics. Here's why AI made this discovery. When human researchers didn't, humans look at genetic data in context of what we expect to find. We have models of human migration based on archaeology, linguistics, and previous genetic studies. When data fits the model, we accept it. When it doesn't, we assume there's an error. AI doesn't have expectations. It just processes patterns. When the AI analyzed these samples, it didn't know they were supposed to show only Neolithic ancestry. It calculated genetic distance between samples and every population in its training set, then flagged anomalies. The AI identified 4 individuals who were genetic outliers by statistical distance. They didn't cluster with Neolithic British populations. They didn't cluster with later Iron Age populations. They clustered with Bronze Age steppe populations from Eastern Europe, but existed 1,000 years too early. Human researchers would have seen this and looked for errors. Contamination, mislabeling, database errors. The AI just reported what the data showed: these genomes don't fit any known migration pattern. They're temporally and geographically impossible based on current models, and that's terrifying because the data is valid. Multiple labs, multiple tests, multiple verification protocols. The samples are real. The DNA is authentic. The dates are accurate. 4 ancient Scots have genetics they shouldn't have, and nobody can explain it. If Theory 1 is correct, there was earlier steppe contact with Scotland, then we've fundamentally misunderstood Bronze Age migration. We've dated hundreds of sites across Europe tracking the spread of steppe ancestry. We've built migration models. We've connected genetics to linguistics to archaeology, and apparently there was a whole earlier wave of contact that left genetic traces, but zero archaeological evidence. That's not just missing a piece of the puzzle. That's discovering your puzzle is missing an entire corner, and you never noticed because you thought the picture was complete. If Theory 2 is correct, we're dating things wrong, then radiocarbon dating has systematic errors we don't understand. That method underpins everything we know about ancient history. If it's wrong in this case, how many other dates are wrong? How much of our chronology is built on flawed measurements? If Theory 3 is correct, the same variant evolved independently, then population genetics has a mechanism we don't understand. Genetic variance spreading through populations is the foundation of evolutionary biology. If identical variants can appear spontaneously in separated populations, then genetic similarity doesn't necessarily mean shared ancestry. That breaks everything. Each explanation breaks something fundamental. We're missing major migration events, or our dating methods are flawed, or genetic evolution works differently than we thought. Pick your existential crisis. Since the initial discovery, researchers have expanded the analysis. They've now sequenced 400+ ancient Scottish genomes from various time periods and locations. The AI has identified 11 more genetic outliers, individuals with ancestry patterns that don't match their time period or location. 3 individuals from Western Scotland, dated to 1500 BCE, have Scandinavian genetic markers that shouldn't appear until the Viking Age 2,000 years later. 2 individuals from the Hebrides, dated to 2500 BCE, have Mediterranean ancestry with markers specific to Minoan Crete. 1 individual from mainland Scotland, dated to 1800 BCE, has genetic variants associated with Siberian populations that never migrated to Western Europe. The pattern is consistent: genetic markers from distant populations appearing centuries or millennia before those populations should have had contact with Scotland. And in every case, the individuals are genetic outliers surrounded by people with expected ancestry for that time and place. It's not random noise. The AI is detecting a real pattern of temporal genetic displacement. People with ancestry they shouldn't have, living when they shouldn't have it, leaving DNA evidence that contradicts everything else we know about migration. The University of Edinburgh team is collaborating with geneticists and AI researchers to understand what they found. Current theories include hidden migration routes, small-scale movements along trade routes that left genetic traces but not archaeological ones. Possible, but requires extensive contact networks nobody has evidence for. Genetic admixture we don't understand. Maybe these variants spread through European populations earlier than we thought, but only show up in detectable frequencies later. Possible, but doesn't explain why outliers appear in specific locations with no intermediate populations. Dating methodology problems. Maybe there are specific conditions in Scottish burial sites that throw off radiocarbon dating. Possible, but multiple dating methods confirm the ages. AI pattern recognition errors. Maybe the AI is seeing patterns that aren't there. Except human geneticists verify the sequences. The patterns are real, or something we haven't considered. The option researchers don't say out loud, maybe human migration was far more complex than we've assumed. Maybe small groups traveled vast distances far more frequently than archaeological evidence suggests. Maybe genetics tells a different story than material culture, and we've been looking at incomplete data this entire time. Here's what's terrifying about this discovery. We thought we understood human migration pretty well. Tens of thousands of ancient DNA samples, sophisticated genetic analysis, AI pattern recognition. The technology is cutting edge. The data is extensive. The methods are rigorous. And then AI finds something impossible. Not impossible because it's unbelievable. Impossible because it's real and contradicts verified models built on decades of research. The DNA exists. The dates are accurate. The analysis is valid. And none of it should be possible. When you find something that contradicts everything you thought you knew, either your data is wrong or your understanding is incomplete. In this case, the data isn't wrong. Multiple labs verify it. Multiple methods confirm it. The genetic sequences are real, which means our understanding is incomplete. Somewhere in the current model of how humans moved across Europe during the Bronze Age, there's a fundamental gap. Either people traveled more than we thought, or genetic variants spread through mechanisms we don't understand, or our chronology is wrong in ways that affect everything built on it. AI doesn't care about existing models. It just processes data and identifies patterns. And the pattern it found is clear. Ancient Scottish DNA contains genetic variants from populations that shouldn't have been there yet. The variants are real. The dates are accurate. The implications are terrifying. Because if we missed this, what else are we missing? How many other impossible genetic patterns exist in ancient DNA that we haven't found yet because we're not looking for them? How much of human history needs to be rewritten because AI can see patterns that contradict everything we thought we understood? The DNA doesn't lie, but it's telling a story nobody expected, and we're only beginning to understand what that story means.